The Auckland Council elections and representation matters. And I notice that, just for clarification, the Joint Government's Working Party consists of whom? Did we choose that?
Through the
Oh,
chair.
jolly good.
Councillor Julie Ferry is the chair. I do have a list which I can come up with in short order, or Councillor Julie Ferry can do that for you.
Sure. I have a list.
We all on this if we want to be?
So we've got 6 of us and 6 local board reps. The 6 of us are Daniel, Shane, Andy, Karen, John and me. And then local boards, it is, I can't remember what I mean, Kath Handley, Kay Thomas, Richard Northey, John Gillen, Maria Meredith and Angela Full-James. Boom.
Well, there you go. Fancy that. I had no idea about all that.
First meeting's next week.
Hey?
First meeting is next week.
Oh, very good. There'll be buns, no doubt. Off you go.
Your Worship and members, the purpose of this report is to firstly simply receive the evaluation of the 2022 elections, the report and local board feedback, along with any comments you wish to make, will serve as input into the planning for the 2025 elections. One of the areas for which we received some criticism was the frustration of some voters casting special votes on election day by the close of voting at 12 noon. This is despite voters having 3 weeks to cast a vote. However, no voter should find the experience of voting to be frustrating. We're suggesting that we investigate changing the voting method from postal voting to a combination of booth and postal voting. This would mean that booth voting would be available until 7 p.m. on election day. But it could mean that the first announcements of the result of the election are deferred to the following day. There would also be a cost to staffing booths. We estimate a minimum of about $1,000 per booth for one day. A change of voting method is a decision that you make, and we're seeking guidance on whether you support us investigating this change further. The report also signals other decisions that you make for the 2025 elections. In particular, the Council's required to conduct a review of representation arrangements. And at this point, we are seeking your agreement that the Joint Governance Working Party develops the Council's initial proposal in consultation with the full governing body and all local boards for recommendation back to the governing body.
Okay, well, I shall respond first up and then everyone else can have a crack. There was only 6,992 people who managed to get themselves in trouble on the last day. So I don't know whether that warrants much of a change, and if there was a change, and I speak as the person who got by far the most votes in the room, why don't we just go to booth? Yeah, well, that's all right. You're welcome to stand against me. It's only $200. And why not just have booth voting? It's a hell of a lot cheaper. And that's what the country survived on for many, many years. And when you look at the rules that we've got, some of our rules make no sense in the light of postal voting, which is bloody expensive and pisses people off. We have a rule that you can't advertise on the last day, on the actual polling day. That came in because when we had booths, they weren't supposed to influence people on the day that they went into the actual booth and voted. Now we pull them down on that last day, and you've had 3 weeks going past all the signs. And so there is no sense to that. And so given the costs associated with this, and from my question so far, booth voting is infinitely cheaper than postal voting, and postal voting has lots of problems because people don't live where they say they live and whatnot. So I want to make sure that the group of people who I'm not a part of, but I would like to come to your meetings if you'd like to ask me, consider the alternative of just booth voting. And then in terms of later in the year, we're going to have an election, a review of our thing. Well, that's going to be a kerfuffle, because I'm aware in the room there are some people who want a bigger council, believe it or not, and there's quite a few of us that would like a much smaller council, believe it or not. And there's Councillor Turner who doesn't agree with any of this stuff. And is going to let me know what it is now. You're next, Councillor Turner.
Henderson.
Oh,
Sorry.
oh, Henderson, out of the blocks, Henderson myself.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Turner. I owe you one. Postal vote. We're on questions. How can I phrase this into a question? Can you come back to me? Because postal voting sucks and I've got a rant about it. Okay. I wonder on the D there whether we have enough scope to investigate just booth voting, because I think that's what we should be doing. I agree with you completely, Mr. Mayor, and I would add that anyone that flats, anyone that has moved out of home recently, 100 different categories of people, they don't get the ballot papers. So that's not democracy. So booth voting, fantastic, let's do it. I'm keen to change D if it doesn't cover it already. So I suppose my question is, does D allow us to do just booth voting?
Through you, Your Worship, we decently seek support, your support, that we investigate this further. We can certainly investigate just booth voting as well. Bring you back some costs. The cost that I mentioned, $1,000 per booth, that's just based on making provision for special voting, which has been the problem. The Electoral Commission, in its annual report, we did look into this a little bit, indicated they had a total of 2,500 voting places throughout New Zealand, and that's approximately about 38 booths per electorate, and there's 23 electorates, I think, in the Auckland area. So that would kind of, like, that mounts up if you have that density of booths, and you're looking at about more like 800,000, I think. Yeah.
That's not a fair comparison, because their electorates cover much bigger areas than what these ones do. And so within Auckland you'd have, Rodney is the size of Israel, and some of the other ones are the size of a small corner of London. So you'd have to just, if we ask you to look into it, you've got to look into it and come back. But there's $915,000 wasted on mail, and apparently 5.28 million, 4 million of what Dolskowski spent was also chasing addresses and whatnot. And so there's a lot to be said for it. And so I think you can take it that we want you to investigate the three, as it is, jointly and booths only, old school. And then that deals with that. And then in terms of the review later on, are we asked to make a decision about that now, or are you just saying, do you want us to, noting that we're going to do that?
It's to get agreement to the process, which is to use the Joint Governance Working Party.
Okay, because that's going to be a can of worms. The first bit, you should be able to come back with some costs and advantages and disadvantages in the way we vote quite quickly, but how we're going to actually review is going to be quite something or other else. Councillor Turner and Councillor Fuli.
My question is, does anybody think I'm crazy agreeing absolutely 100% with Mr. Henderson?
Either you're both crazy or well. The answer to that is that we've reassessed it and you are now not crazy. Councillor Fuli, who are not definitely not crazy.
Kia ora, thank you. Yeah, I think it's been canvassed quite well, and I think you can, sense that people are in support of a change. So yeah, I definitely support you looking into that, and wherever that falls, whether it be just the booths or a mix of the two would be great. Of course, I'd love to have digital in there, but I understand that's outside of the scope. And I just want to throw a comment in there as well, if I can, that, when we're at 34, 35% of engagement from our voters, that is a threat to democracy. And, in those legal spaces in academia, we've been talking about that for some time. So it's good to see that we are shifting and looking for solutions for that. Kia ora.
Councillor Hills, please.
Kia ora, Mayor, thank you. I think, I'd like to see how much you can do in that time, I'm not sure. A sort of review of what is possible, because I do know that we moved to postal because I think booth voting got down to 14% or something, so we don't want to make it worse. And the other issue would be around how people access the information before they walk through the door, because it's easy to go red, blue, yellow, green on central government election day, but it's kind of hard to walk into the booth and go, here's the 48 people I have to choose from individually. And so I guess I need to know how that would interface with people. Do people get sent out? Would we
Ask
still...
your parents. They did it.
They did what?
Walked into a booth and voted for their local body with 48 people on the wall.
Yeah, but 86% of them didn't, so I want to know why that happened then.
Well, ask your parents.
You've thrown me off, Mayor. But the question I have for Rose would be, how does this weave into the Future for Local Government stuff? Because there is a lot of conversation about, and at the same time, having Electoral Commission maybe come in and running different things, or having some sort of change to everyone's voting system. Does that happen concurrently with our choices? Could it be that government end up funding some of the ability for us to do this? Sorry.
I think after the 2019 elections, when the Select Committee conducted an inquiry, I thought 2016 actually, conducted an inquiry, we were invited to make a submission, and at that time they were seeking feedback on what we felt about changing to the Electoral Commission running our elections. And the governing body here in its submission said that was supported that in principle. And basically taking the view of the voter into account, and what is an easier voting experience for the voter. And it is possibly less confusing for the voter if there is just the one agency that runs all the elections. On the other hand, if it's centralised, would a centralised body be able to communicate and engage with our communities? And there are those. So it's in principle support.
Councillor Watson, please.
Just got a brief comment to make, Mr. Mayor, so I'll wait for the questions. Don't want to set a precedent.
I'll do it. Just do it now. Come on. Will. Okay, right. I have something to look forward to. It'd be bloody good. Now, Morris Williamson.
I just want to ask a quick question of officials about whether any of the work they are doing are looking at the electoral roll integrity. It seems to me to be the most crazy thing in the world that you send a letter to someone's address saying, "Are you still there?" And if you're not, you don't reply, and so you keep on the roll.
Correct.
And I'll give you the best example I've seen of that was a street in my electorate that has just been completely bought by Auckland Transport, the entire Tiraka Drive. They bought the entire street to put the busway down. And when I was campaigning down there and holding up sort of signs on the side of the road, making an idiot of myself with others, we noticed that in every house along Tiraka Drive, the letterboxes were full of purple envelopes. But there was nobody living in the houses. They had all gone some time ago.
So you grabbed them and that's why you've got such a good vote?
That's how I got elected. No, the good news is my computer system did a check to make sure nobody else did, and there was no one actually recorded as voting from any of the addresses in Te Rākau. But I would say 500-600 purple envelopes were sitting in the letterboxes for days.
That's a lot of envelopes.
But, well, it's a big long street. It's a very long street. And there were some with 5 and 6 envelopes per letterbox. And it just seems to me the integrity of an electoral system where you don't know where people actually do live and you deliver envelopes to people that don't actually live in those houses is something that probably should be a bit of a precursor to whether we worry about whether they go into a booth or do it by mail.
So that means
Everybody that used to live in Te Rākau obviously didn't. I don't know what happened to the envelopes. I reported it to AT and said to them they should have been letting the Electoral Commission know that there are no longer people residing in that entire long road, but they didn't seem to be interested in it. They said it wasn't part of a transport issue. So
you didn't pull them out, Maury, did you?
I just said I can show you the database of who voted in the Howard ward.
All right. We love you, it's okay.
And nobody in Te Rākau Drive voted because they didn't live there.
Through the chair, if I may, you've hit on a very important point that we are in dialogue with the Electoral Commission about that system doesn't work. We believe that is a very important thing to get the electoral roll from which the local electoral roll is established. So one idea we've put to them is that they potentially do the same thing as they did for the census, which is send a letter to the household and say, time to update your details, here's how you do it. It is very easy, by the way. It takes less than 5 minutes. I did it myself recently. So just reminding people rather than sending a letter just saying, are you still there, seems like a better idea to us. So in constant discussion with them, and certainly they're open to new ideas. So hopefully we can get that better next time, because that's where it starts. You're quite right.
To show you how old I am, we used to have a joke as kids that we'd leave a note for the milkman. If this note blows away, please leave 2 pints of cream.
Entertaining. There are other things that happen with the postal voting. There are people who gather up whole areas of postal votes and vote, and that's common in South Auckland. And if they have to show up, they have to show up. You have to show up as a voter. That's one of the advantages about a booth.
Objection.
It is you. Oh, well, we've got videos of them in front loader who. And I come from there, so I'm criticising myself. And the other thing about in where there's postal boxes, there's a whole lot of letters biffed out and other people collect them and vote. So it's pretty tricky. Councillor Ferry, we've ruined your speech. I'm sorry.
It's
I
okay.
humbly apologise. A long day.
I believe we're still in question time, so I guess I would just remind members, I know we're all really, really interested in this topic, but we do have quite a process to come where we can work through the minutiae of it. So looking forward to those conversations and hopefully some more sparkling anecdotes and witty jokes about voting. So my question is around that wording there for D. Is at the moment, I feel that does read a little bit too tightly to allow for what people have indicated an interest in. So I was going to suggest that to investigate the options of postal booth voting and possible combinations, because at the moment that does imply only doing them together. And obviously the status quo is always an option. So would that be a better wording from your point of view?
Happy with that, yes, Councillor.
Okay, I'll come over and do that. And can I just also note the representation review, which is the E, can you just confirm we have to do that by law every 6 years, don't we? And we have done it before, so we have a process to follow.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, there's a major difference this time round, and that is that when we did it for 2019, we were not able to change the number of councillors.
True. But currently, if we did it tomorrow, we still couldn't change the number of councillors, but hopefully by the time we get to this process, we will be able to. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for confirming that. Sandra, I'll come help with the wording.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ferry. Councillor Newman.
Just on the order of names on the voting documents, I know that at the moment we can either have by alphabetical or you can choose to have a randomised ballot paper. It seems that the randomised would be quite expensive. Is there the option that they have in Australia whereby the returning officer conducts a ballot to determine by chance where you will be on the ballot paper versus everybody else? Is that an option, or can we only basically go either alphabetical or the computer spits out a ballot paper which is unique to every single elector?
Through you, Your Worship, there are three options. One is alphabetical. The second option is what's called pseudo-random, and that's where the order of names is determined, and it's the same order of names on every voting paper, but it's random. And the third option is true random, where it's actually uniquely random on each voting document. Does that make sense?
What about reverse alphabet? Can you not have that?
No, we're not. So
Now, we have reported this before every election, and the position of the governing body to date is to say that it just makes life a bit more difficult for the voter, and we have conducted a statistical analysis of whether there was a trend in previous election results, and to date there hasn't been a trend which favours those at the top of the list. But we'll do the same thing prior to the 2025 elections.
sorry, can I just understand? So this. Can I just understand? So the pseudo-random, that's a computer decides a randomised ballot, and that's basically it for that particular area, and the computer does that, does it?
Yes, it's a random order of names, but it's the same random order of names on every voting document. And just on the other point you raised, it's not actually more expensive these days. It used to be.
Councillor Sharon Stewart, you're at home. Come in, Sharon.
Right, sorry about that. Okay, it sounds like I'm echoing again, am I?
Yeah, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, that's all good. It's echoing my side. No, I was just agreeing with the booth idea. I think that's a much better idea, and I have to agree with what Councillor Morrison was saying about Te Rakau Drive. We did actually speak to Auckland Transport, and one of the suggestions was to remove the letterboxes or to at least cover them up, because there was not only that kind of mail, there was all sorts of mail, and yeah, so that's something we can look at into the future, I think. And yeah, the postal, the booth idea is a really good idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, we've got slightly amended wording with the approval of the mover and seconder.
Very happy. Any comments?
And any further comments? We've got John Watson. We're waiting with bated breath for this.
It's always worth the wait, Mr. Mayor. I know. I just wanted to briefly make a couple of comments to the first three there, not so much the postal voting, and that goes to the evaluation of the elections. There was, and I don't know if people read it all, but it was actually a very interesting document that was provided there in the attachments, both in terms of kind of generalisations about other countries, which show us not that much out of kilt with what happens in other places, you know, despite all the hand wringing and about low turnout, and similarly with the low turnout being indicative of, of lower socio-economic areas around the world and younger people not voting. I guess the thing that did stand out for me, though, in New Zealand, though, was quite an interesting comparison on the turnout amongst the big metro councils, and there we do stand out, because, and it compared Auckland and all the rest of them from 2010 to 2022. So Auckland went down from 51% to 35% turnout, and notwithstanding the fact we know that was the first super city election. Christchurch went down from 52 to 43, Dunedin 53 to 48, and Wellington actually went up from 40 to 43. So the outlier there is Auckland, still in lower, a significantly lower turnout. So there's a dynamic going on in Auckland that is a bit more concerning than the other main cities in New Zealand. As far as this election goes, and Rose, you said before this was our chance to give a little bit of feedback. Mine is entirely random, but it perhaps goes a little bit to, you know, the experience of, you know, people that are actually involved in it. And in that article that your booklet, they made a commentary about, you know, why do people not vote? And one of the kind of explainers there was, oh, well, you know, people don't know anything about the candidate, so that's what's put some people, a significant number of people off. And the response to that was that there is a booklet supplied that does tell a bit about the candidate. I'd just say from my experience that booklet is blinking shabby. I spent hours getting a photo this time, because I know how random it is, right? Most people, they'll just take a look at you or look at your hoardings and, oh yeah, he looks okay, or no, I don't like her, or whatever. And I was quite precise about, this is where it gets entertaining, about my photo, and spent hours down at the warehouse, nearly missed getting my nomination in on time. And then when they came to the booklet, the first thing they'd done, they'd split my incredibly lucid 150 words into 2 pages, which didn't read well. And the photo they had absolutely butchered, so it looked like some guy had just got out of a 15-year stretch at Parimorimo. Quite different from what I'd put in. So,
Is this how you got elected?
well, actually,
It was better than 1 year. It was better than 1 year.
Parimorimo is in our ward, so maybe it did help a bit. The other couple of random bits of feedbacks was in the hoardings, and a big chunk of the Albany ward, they just removed the sites for the Upper Harbour, so about 50% of the sites where you could put up your hoardings were just taken out with no apparent explanation, and particularly for the new candidates who didn't have that many sites, that was particularly galling. And the final parting shot is the reference to civics education. I know the council did obviously make some material available, but in previous elections, probably the most uplifting and hopeful kind of experience out of anything to do with getting people involved in elections was when they went to the local schools, when our council was in promoting in local schools. The most knowledgeable, the most active, the most informed were the kids, the year 7 or 8 kids who had done their civics course courtesy of Auckland Council, but I don't think we did it on the same level this time round. But that was something that really did work. There you go, Mr. Mayor. There's my feedback.
That was worth waiting for, actually, absolutely worth waiting for. And I think we can explain the thing why Wellington always gets a higher level of vote. It's in Wellington, that's the most interesting thing they can do. Councillor Walker, the bar's been set very high here, so I don't want anything less than fascinating.
I'm not going to match John, but I mean, John's sometimes misses things out, and he did miss out one occurrence when they actually got his photo completely wrong, and they put somebody else there. Can you imagine that?
Brad Pitt.
No, it wasn't Brad Pitt.
Oh.
I'd just like to add a few no-brainers to the mix, and really one of the tests to apply for these sorts of things is just take somebody off the street and ask them some questions and the like, and you come up with some interesting stuff. They had these booths. For example, I'd have a booth at the supermarket. There was no sign at any of the supermarkets that there was actually a voting booth in the supermarket often. And then I'd go into the supermarket and I'd ask one of the supermarket people where the booth was, and they didn't know. There was no signage and the like. This also applied to any number of locations, so it was pretty difficult. And as John mentioned, there was no opportunity to have signs up in many locations, And this doesn't cost a cracker. I mean, the candidates are putting the signs up, informing people that it's time to vote. So why wouldn't you do that? Just crazy, basic stuff. I could go through a long list of, marketing 101 stuff that you do that we just don't get right, and some that doesn't cost any money. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Richard Hills.
Kia ora, thank you, Mayor. And I guess we had different supermarkets on the North Shore than Councillor Walker, because we had very good signage and very good visibility of those booths, and I found that one of the handiest things this election was having those booths, but I know it was a lot of work for our staff to go and pick up those many voting papers from those areas. I guess just for me, and I think, the issue, I guess we point to postal, we point to things. I think on the margins, postal does create a lot of problems. A lot of people don't know where they're enrolled. A lot of people move in a 3-year period. A lot of people have their papers get wet and then they don't bother, or they hide them in the fridge. I don't know if booth voting will change the dial a lot. It's around what people think about the city, think about us, think about what we talk about. And if you sit around here sometimes, if anyone ever tuned into the live stream, they'd probably never want to vote at all. But the deal for us is as elected members or current ones, is to do what we say and show people good things we do, or get them to understand, like we have through this budget process, of what the decisions we have to make and how that they can play into that. A lot of the time elected members are out there from local boards or this body bagging the council, bagging our own people, bagging the things we do, and that it creates a toxic environment. And that's what I get feedback from throughout the election campaign, is actually you talk a lot about negative things and you're all at each other about negative things, so we don't want to be involved in that process. The other issue is around the assumption many people make that only ratepayers can vote or should vote, and it's around making sure we have that language around residents or people or our local community being involved in the voting process, as opposed to just to get the rates bill, because we all pay rates in some way. I think there is a massive issue, and I personally haven't cracked that nut. It feels like during the election campaign that everyone's either voted or going to vote, and they're all exciting when they talk to your face, but then you look at the numbers and it doesn't really add up. So I think it's on all of us to try our best. I don't know what the answer is. I'm sceptical that booth voting would change that. I will say little things like extending that time on the day. A lot of people see the date and forget that the date is not the day, much like the election campaign. It's about stretching out, you have opportunities up until that time, and cutting it off at 12. You may as well have cut it on the Friday. A lot of people are running around trying to get their votes in. So I think it's on all of us to improve democracy, not necessarily our staff or the voting process. It may improve things on the margin, if I'm honest, but it would be good to see some more evidence on a change and what that means. But it's largely up to politicians and the organisation to deliver what people expect as a good city, and I guess stop talking about it, which is a good time to turn off my mic.
And a lot of the negative stuff is found on Twitter, you might really remember as well, often put by us. All right, well, I think the winning speech of the day goes to John Watson. Yeah. And last little silly anecdote, as the sole resident of the CBD, I followed the floating flags to the library where it said to get voting, to get the papers for lodging to stand as a candidate. I went up to the desk right beside the little flag there that had it waving around and asked them, and they knew nothing about it. And I'd wait 10 minutes from a grumpy woman who came down upstairs who had the one form in the Central Library, and she told me I wasn't allowed to have it until I'd answered some questions. And I've got her name. I'll put that amended one, which has been promoted and seconded, to the vote. All those in favour of that, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary? We've voted it in. Thank you much. It's carried, and we're going to get. We have to have an extension of time, which will be rewarded by 5 minutes off to go to the loo. I will move Move an extension of time from the Deputy Mayor and seconded by anyone who's moving, which is Shane Henderson. All those in favour of an extension of time, please say aye. But not too much. Carried. 5 minutes, back on 4. The bell will ring.